Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread. In this episode we have several Dogman stories for you. Enjoy the creepypasta, but don't forget to like, share, subscribe and hit the bell icon and be aware of what lurks beneath. So, my boyfriend and I lived together for a while, and after a while it seemed pretty normal. Things got crazy in the relationship, so I moved out. We were apart for about 9 months before I moved back in. During that time, we worked things out. He told me that 2 of his friends had moved in for a short time. Cool? Now things start to get strange. The apartment wasn't as comfortable once I moved back in. I felt like I was being watched. It was creepy to walk by the bathroom, and I was sure I could see shadows dancing in the hall from the living room. I'd closed the doors to both bedrooms because I thought the light from outside might be making the shadows of the trees show up in the hall. But no sir, it didn't stop there. I ignored it at first and thought it was just my imagination running wild. Until one night when I was sitting on the edge of the bed in our bedroom. I looked over his shoulder and saw a child's shadow run from the front of the apartment down the hall and into the bedroom. I jumped up and ran to the bedroom, but no one was there. I told him about it, and all he said was that I was making it up. He doesn't believe in ghosts or other strange things. After a few days, his daughter was brought to him. She played in the other room, got quiet, and then came into the living room where we were sitting to ask him, "Daddy, whose baby was that in the hallway?" At this point, I was happy but not sure what was going on. Happy that I wasn't the only one who didn't know what to do when they saw a child and not a baby yet. Again, he didn't pay attention to it and said it was just us. But then, we often watched movies together in the living room. We heard sounds one day, and I told him something was wrong. The apartment had something in it. And it happened, which made me happy. He saw a man who, like the baby and child, was a dark shadow. The door to her room opened and then shut again. This time, she wasn't there. Her mother was with her? Once he got to the door handle stopped moving. This shadow would peek around corners and watch us from the hallway. It scared me to death. He said he was sorry for not believing, even though he had been a skeptic his whole life, and had been shown wrong. He told his friend that he had lived there for a while before I moved back. His friend said things like that in a casual way. Follow me around, and have since I was a child. I guess I left one behind. I got angry. I think that when you move into someone's home, you should share something with them. I snore, you know. Casper is my first cousin, and we're pretty close. We moved, but I'm still not sure what's going on. For example, was it a baby or a man? Did it come to us in more than one way? Was it 3 and not just 1? But at our new place, it feels like we didn't move here by ourselves. So, does it now belong to us? I still have so many questions. Hey, everyone! About 2 weeks ago, I had a really scary experience that my husband doesn't believe. But last night, he had a very similar experience, and now we're both wondering what we could have seen. Our dog was barking because it needed to go outside to the bathroom. It was around 4 or 5 in the morning. I took him out back and stood on our deck steps, so I wouldn't get my feet wet. When I looked up, I saw something across the yard where my dog was going to the bathroom. It was coming toward me slowly, like one step at a time, and its eyes reflected the flashlight from my phone very well. I thought it was a deer, but its eyes were so big and looked right at me. It wasn't trying to escape. But as I got closer, I heard the dog get up, so we ran into the house. I have nightmares that keep coming back. So at first, my husband thought it was just that, but I was crying and shaking so much that I could barely talk about it. He said it was likely a deer, but I didn't believe him. I wouldn't let the dog out after midnight. This morning, around 5 a.m., I did take the dog out. He took the dog outside because it was barking. Again, my husband stood on the deck steps. He didn't have his glasses, but he said that when he looked up, he saw something tall standing in the forest part of our backyard. He said that it moved slowly, almost like it was gliding. He said he got a nosebleed as soon as he saw it. My husband usually gets nosebleeds, but since the season has changed, he hasn't had one. He said that he wanted to get a better look but felt like he had to go inside instead. He ran inside. My husband is also a zookeeper, and he doesn't have much of a fear of animals. He works with giraffes and elephants, and he says this creature was definitely bigger than any deer. We've been looking for other things it could be, but haven't found anything. Any thoughts? We live in eastern Pennsylvania, just so you know. If you need to be more specific or want to use my yard as an example, take a picture of it. Just let me know that this happened 3 years ago in the middle of July. I lived in Montana near a small town with about 2,000 people. During this time, I lived by myself in a small ranch house with only 1 floor. My next-door neighbor was a farmer who lived a mile away. Before this one, I hadn't met many strange people, but the woods near my house always gave me the creeps. Soon after I moved in, I understood why the people who lived there before me left. Not too long, I would hear sounds coming from the woods. There were sounds that sounded like screams and growls that would make your blood boil. After doing some research, I found out that even a raccoon or bobcat can make these strange sounds, and I was shocked to find out that was what it was. But it still didn't feel right. It's hard to explain, but I'd never felt this way before, and something about the woods near my house made me feel uneasy. I always felt like I was being watched. The very first time. I couldn't say what happened, but it happened about 2 weeks after I moved in. There was a thunderstorm, and the thunder was loud enough to keep me awake. The lightning was crazy and would light up the whole area around for a very short time. I was sleeping on the couch and got up to get a glass of water from the sink. It was just after 2 a.m. if I remember right. There's a small window above it that lets me see my yard all the way up to the tree line. The next lightning bolt hit. I saw it. The view wasn't long, but it was long enough for me to figure out what it was. It was close to the edge of the trees and only a few steps into my yard. It looked like a bear at first, but it wasn't. It was standing on 2 legs and facing the house. Its legs were bent like a dog's, and the hocks were easy to see. The color of the fur was hard to tell, but it was dark. Its upper body was big and wide, and its arms almost reached the ground when it stood up. Strangely, the upper body seems to be much bigger than the lower body. After being shocked, I just stood there and froze, so I could wait for the next lightning strike. But it wasn't there when it did. It happened so fast and was over so fast after that I bought a gun and slept with it close by. The next thing I'll do is what I think is the scariest thing I've ever done. Nothing interesting happened for a few weeks. I don't have cable where I live, and one night I was watching something and my satellite kept acting up. I didn't like going out at night, but this would be quick. All I had to do was move the antenna a bit. For a few weeks, nothing can happen. So I just went outside and did it. I went outside with my gun and flashlight. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was all around me at night this time of year. There are a lot of different kinds of animals in the woods. Not tonight, though. Even though I was getting scared, I went over to the satellite and started making changes to it. I heard a small snap of a stick, so I quickly turned to my left and shined the light in the direction of the noise. I will always be horrified by what I saw. I was met with red eyes right away. The color of these eyes was like blood, and they were bad. The thing's head looked like a German shepherd that had been changed. I don't like to say it, but it had a long nose and pointed ears like a werewolf. It had black fur that was rough. I could see that this creature had very strong muscles in some places, and it was much bigger than even the biggest people on Earth. It was half in and half out of the woods, and I almost had to bend over to see it, but it still came up to my head when I was fully standing at 6 feet. It would have been 8 feet tall. I thought I was about 20 feet away from it. Even though I thought my gun would protect me, I didn't even think about it. The little 2-23 bolts would have just annoyed this thing before it tore me to pieces. I slowly moved away, but I never took my eyes off of it. When I gently grabbed my gun, my fight or flight instincts kicked in. I chose to fly. This might not be the best choice. But this thing would have killed me even if I had stayed there. I ran faster than I ever had before and never looked back. I don't know if it was coming after me or not. I got into the house, though, and locked every door and window and pulled down the blinds. I then sat with my back against the wall and held the gun the whole night. To make a long story short, I didn't sleep a wink that night and didn't sleep much in the days that followed. I no longer live there. People often say that Sasquatches live in balance with nature and are part of the ecosystem. Sure, if you see one, it might seem scary, but this thing was so different that you'd probably be more amazed than anything else. It felt unnatural. It was scary and felt bad. It was following me and messing with me, and I think if it could have, it would have killed me. I have never seen or felt anything like this again in my life. I try to forget about it, but I still have bad dreams about it. I think I will remember that picture until the day I die. The werewolves from the movie are the best thing I've seen that looks like the creature. West Virginia is one of the more remote states in the eastern United States. My uncle lives in town, but he also has a small cabin up on Spruce Knob where he and my aunt would go during the summer. This cabin is very far away and can only be reached by jeep trails. It is also not connected to the power grid. So, when my aunt and uncle had a 3-day weekend in the late 1980s, they went to the cabin to go fly fishing and chill out in the woods. When they got there, my aunt went outside to draw and my uncle unpacked and started a fire in the fireplace. As it was getting dark already. As night fell, my uncle noticed that the woods were very quiet. He has been camping, canoeing, and backpacking all over the world, and he says this is the quietest he has ever heard them. He and my aunt put everything away and went to bed late, around midnight. Strange thumping and scratching sounds came from outside and woke up my uncle. He thought it was probably a bear or coyotes trying to get out of the dog. He got his gun and went to deal with it. He took the gun out of its case as he said this. The door on the outside opened, and in the moonlight, a large hairy shape that looked vaguely like a person could be seen. He said. He never got a good look at it, but the thing he remembers most is the strong smell of decay and the 2 yellow eyes that were glowing. He quickly fired the gun until it was empty. He didn't kill the animal, but he did scratch its arm, which made it run squealing into the woods. He and my aunt quickly got their things together, got in their Bronco, and sped away. What my uncle saw never really bothered them again, and when he went back the next morning with more people and guns, he didn't find much evidence of an invasion except for a strange clawed footprint in front of the cabin and claw marks on the door. My uncle is known for making up stories, so I'm not sure if I should believe him or not. But, unlike the other stories he told this one for real, and my aunt even agreed with him. This story has always made me feel very sad, as I liked being in the woods a lot. This summer, I'll be going to their cabin, so maybe, just maybe, I'll see the same strange creature. I live in Washington, where Bigfoot stories are common, so I'm not too worried. My older coworker heard me and my other coworker talking about Bigfoot sightings, so she told us about hers, or at least what she thinks might have been a Bigfoot sighting. Now that I'm close with my coworkers and we tell each other everything about our personal lives, I have no reason not to believe her. She said she and her husband were camping when she saw something across the river. She said that she was also with her dog, which was upset and growling, which was unusual for this dog. She said that this creature was about 7 feet tall and had scraggly fur all over its body. She went back to the trailer to get their shotgun, where she saw that her husband had also seen the same thing. They watched it run through an open area and disappear. What she said about how it could have been watching us for days scared me a little bit. I don't know, but the dog knew I thought it was a normal Bigfoot story until she said it was scraggly. Man, could it have been something else besides a Bigfoot or a dog? How do you feel about it? Timeline? This happened around 2015, but I'm not sure what month it was. It was around 11 p.m. I was driving from where my dad lived to where my mom lived. I've already said this a few times, but my dad owns 75 acres of creepy land where most of my stories will take place. Anyway, I was driving, and I had just started down the long driveway when I felt like I was being watched. It's not cool, but it happens a lot more than you might think. As I get closer to the road, I see a dark shape at the edge of the woods. We have a lot of animals in the area, like deer, bobcats, and even the occasional bear, which sometimes chases me. I have a lot of strange things happen to me, and it wasn't like it was coming straight at me. It just followed my car and stayed at the edge of the woods. So I keep going at the same speed, turn onto the highway, and speed up to about 50, but I keep seeing something out of the corner of my eye, so I slow down and look a few yards behind me. I see this big dog. When I was a kid, we had bigger dogs. When I was a kid, my aunt had a mix of a Saint Bernard and a Saint Bernard, and I've had a few other big dogs. This thing was the size of my car, no joke. I know I've talked about bears before, but bears don't chase cars, and we only have black bears, which are pretty calm unless they feel threatened or are with their young. So, I'm freaking out now. I speed up quickly, cussing at my car and telling it to get over it. It was a badly cared for 1995 Honda Accord, and it broke down a lot. So when I had to push it, I made sure to be nice to it because I didn't care anymore. I was just trying not to die at this point. I can't seem to get rid of it for too long. So, I stop in a church parking lot, which was both brave and stupid, because I thought it might be a hell beast that wouldn't come into the light, or onto church land. I stopped to call my boyfriend on my phone, and in the time it took me to do that, it caught up and jumped on my car. I could see, hear, and feel the metal popping and creaking, and I saw drool splatter on my windshield. I screamed and dropped my phone. It jumped off my car and onto the hood, where I saw it briefly before it went into the cemetery and disappeared. It looked like a mix between a Rottweiler and a pit bull, but it was darker and bigger. It was black all over, and its paws were as big as dinner plates. Its head was so big that it was almost as big as my car windows. I don't know why it decided to leave me alone, but it did, and I'm glad I called my boyfriend while I was crying hysterically. He calmed me down, listened, and told me to take pictures when I got home, which I did or tried to do. By the time I got to my mom's, the only damage was a single dent in the roof of my car and some faint claw marks that were more like indentations in the middle. So I guess it could have been either a hellhound or a dog. Eugene, Oregon, is where I used to live. A friend and I saw something that we couldn't explain about 6 years ago. On the way to a friend's house, we were driving down a country road when I saw something in the middle of the road. At first, it looked like a big dog. I was worried about the animal because I grew up with mastiffs. As we got closer, I started to feel cold and uneasy because it was getting dark. But my car lights weren't on, and I could still see the animal clearly. Still, it was as tall as a deer and moved with a curved back and long, thin legs. It looks like the animal's bones are broken, and it moves in ways that don't make sense, but it didn't cry out in pain or look like it was hurt. The animal's fur was black and looked like the worst case of mange I've ever seen. The bare spots of skin didn't look right, and the bones stuck out from under them. Finally, the animal turned around and looked at my car. It had a long nose and was drooling from its mouth, which was open. It looked like it had big canines. When it turned to look at us, its eyes were glowing red, so we didn't say anything. I know, it sounds like nonsense from a fake ghost story, but I swear this is what they were. I saw these things. The animal's eyes were not lit up like that because my headlights were not on. It moved slowly across in front of my car, and when it went over the edge, my passenger yelled for me to stop and find out what the hell that was. As I pulled up, the animal was gone, and all that was left was a small drainage pipe and an open field. When we got to our friend's house, we told him and his parents about what we'd seen, and his father just laughed and said, "We see those out here sometimes." He then went back to eating dinner. Has anyone seen something close up that looks like this? If my passenger hadn't been there, I would have thought I was making it up. I'm glad to know that what I saw was real and, from my point of view, hard to explain. Was it possible that it was a skinwalker? I have no idea. In a small town in rural Tennessee, kids played outside until there wasn't enough light to see, and even then they found ways to stay out until they were forced to come inside. I was no different. When I was 2 months away from turning 12, I was coming home from playing on a Saturday night. I stopped in my tracks when I heard a strange sound. It was a mix of yips, growls, and a barking growl that came from about 30 yards away. It interested me. I stood on the front porch and tried to figure out where the sound was coming from by looking into the line of trees that their house faced. I thought a dog would come out because people always left their dogs in the country and rarely found homes for them. Most of them just sat on the porch steps and wandered around the woods. I waited for what I thought would be one of these dogs, but nothing happened. After about 10 minutes, when the light was getting darker, I got up to go inside. Again, the sound came. This time, though, it was much deeper and guttier. I felt cold. I heard this sound, and when I looked out into the trees, I saw a tall figure move between them. It was taller than the fence around the trees, which is about 4 to 5 feet tall. I grabbed onto the door. The sound came back, and I could feel it going all the way through me. This is hard to explain. I felt like it led me right there. I opened the door and got ready to go in. I couldn't take my eyes off of where this thing had moved toward the fence. I put my hand on the fence when I saw a piece of what looked like a shadow coming to life. I didn't keep waiting. I walked into the house and then shut the door behind me. I have never told anyone else about this before, but I have never doubted what I saw. I never knew what to call it. I could only make out a vague outline of the face. But the details of that outline made me want to talk about this. It had arms that were too long, thin ears on the side of its head. Its shoulders are wide, and the upper part of its body tapers down. I couldn't see the fence's legs or its feet. I hadn't heard the word Dogman till about a month ago, and I haven't been in grade 12 in many years, but I'm pretty sure that's what I saw out in the woods. How could it have been anything else? My late wife Samantha had just had her third child, and the labor was very hard on her. So she went home to rest for a few days after giving birth. After about a week, she decided to take the baby to see her mother, who lived about 20 minutes away in a rural area. She had to take a 2-lane blacktop road in the middle of nowhere in Illinois called Riddle Road. She decided around 3 p.m. to start going home. As she was driving home before it got dark, she saw what she thought was a tall man standing next to the road. She slowed down in case the man stepped into the road, but as she got closer, she saw that it wasn't a man at all, but a tall creature with jet black fur. This scared her, and when she got close to the creature, she almost stopped her car. Since it was the middle of October, I thought it was someone in a really well-made Halloween costume, but it was clear right away that it wasn't a costume at all. She said the creature was about 7 feet tall, had jet black fur, eyes that looked like yellow gold, and walked on 2 legs like a dog. She went on to say that it looked like a bodybuilder and that she could see its very muscular body through the places where the fur was thinner. She said that instead of paws, it had hands with long fingers. She stopped about 20 feet away from this thing because she was so shocked to see it standing next to the road. She could see its breath in the cold air, and its fur moved with the wind, so she knew it was a living, breathing animal. She and it just looked at each other for what she said felt like 20 minutes, but was probably less than a minute or two. In the end, she said that it smiled. Yes, it smiled at her, which was too much for her, and she stepped on the gas, as they say. She looked in her rearview mirror and said, as she drove away, that it walked across the road and into a cornfield on the other side. Yes, it walked on 2 legs. I know the story sounds fake, and it doesn't matter if anyone believes it or not, but if you knew her and heard her tell the same story over and over again with no changes, you might think twice before going down Riddle Road alone. When I was a little boy in the early 1980s, this happened to me. A few facts about me at the time this was going on. I lived with my grandmother at my grandmother's house because my parents' relationship was unstable, and it wasn't safe for me to be with them. That's a whole different bad dream. But I'm going to talk about this one today because she didn't really have a spare room. I would sleep on her big couch in the living room, with my back to the couch. On the other side of the living room is a small reading nook with 3 big, angled windows. Taking a nap on the sofa. I could look to my right and see straight through the windows, which were about 20 feet away. Anyway, I was sleeping one night when something woke me up. I didn't know why, but I felt like my instincts told me to turn to my right. When I looked to my right, I saw a very tall grey figure with red eyes that was staring at me from the nook. I remember yelling as loud as I could, and my grandmother was about to come running down the stairs. I was hysterical and in a panic, and I told her what I had just seen. She told herself it was just a bad dream and put a blanket over the windows. I don't know how much longer it watched me, but by the time my grandmother came downstairs after I screamed, it was gone. I stayed in that room for the next 3 months. I always put the blanket back over the window in that nook. When it got dark, I couldn't go to sleep until the sun came up. I always had the feeling that it was looking at me through the blanket and still wanted me to come outside. I still get chills when I think about it, and it scared me so much. I don't remember exactly where my grandmother lived because she died right before I turned 13. But I do remember that she lived a long way west of where I live in New York. I think she wasn't too far from Pennsylvania, but I don't remember exactly how far. Date, 2015, location. River in the summer, around 11:30 p.m., nights in Montana are hot and humid. I lived alone in this faraway place. We have no cable. So satellite TV is the only choice. The TV was acting up again on a hot, humid night in July. So, like always, I had to go outside and adjust the satellite. When I went outside, I had a gun and a flashlight with me. It was very quiet for a change. I had also bought an AR. Due to other sightings I've had, but they weren't solid enough for me to call it a dog, man, it was so quiet. It was strange. I pushed that thought out of my mind and went to the dish in the corner of my yard. I went to work and made sure all the wires were in order and pointing in different directions. I suddenly hear a stick snap to my left, so I point the flashlight in that direction. I looked over and saw something standing there. I got a good look at for what seemed like forever but was only about 10 seconds. I slowly moved away, ran back to my house, and locked all the doors and windows. When I shined a light on this creature, it was unlike anything I had ever seen before. The first thing I noticed was the head. The ears were cut short and pointed up. The snout was longer and narrower than a bear's, and I could see big teeth sticking out of the jaw. Its eyes were a very dark red color that seemed to reflect light. I was pointing to the huge, muscled body. It looked like its arms were longer than its legs. He had wide shoulders that got narrower toward his waist. When I saw it, it was hunched over and had one hand wrapped around a small tree. I could see the legs, which looked like dog legs. Even the way it was lying down showed that it was a hawk. It was about as tall as I am, which is 6 feet when I stand up straight. This thing could have been anywhere from 7.5 to 8 feet tall. The neck and chest had thicker, blacker fur, while the bottom half had much less. So I'm not sure if it was mean or not. I know I had a feeling of dread that was different from anything else I've felt. Was it just watching me, or, for something so big, was it following me? It was too quiet to be true. It was only 15 yards away from me, but I didn't notice. I only knew that I had to leave and not find out what was going on. I no longer live on the property. But after the event, I never met anyone in person again. But sounds would come from the woods. I could not explain. Most of the time, they would start out pretty quiet and then get louder and louder until they were yelling like crazy. I'm not sure if this is the same thing because it could have been a local animal. Where it is? If you want to look it up on Google Maps, the place where this happened is 61,720 Montana Highway 43 Wise River. I want to tell you a short story. My dad was recently scared away from the woods by what he calls the biggest wolf he's ever seen. I'm very interested in the paranormal. So when he told me about it, I was very interested and pushed him for more information. He hates to talk about it because it scared him a lot. I don't know what my dad saw out there, but whatever it was, it scared him a lot, and he doesn't scare easily. He has lived through a lot. There are knife fights, gang fights, and drug deals in prison. He's been right up against death, but he told me he's never been so scared as when this thing came at him. The best way he could describe what happened was that a big black dog with a hunched back, too many sharp teeth for its mouth, and piercing eyes ran at him. As he got closer to the dead body of a 3-pointed buck that had been left on the ground almost untouched. He said that as he got closer to the body, he heard noise coming from the left side of the clearing. This dog just started to chase after him. He said that his fight or flight instincts have never been so strong at once. So he ran. He thinks that charge was just a bluff, so he made him run the 3/4 mile back to his truck. My dad can't figure out why a dead buck would be in a clearing like that. It wasn't being eaten, it was just lying there as if it had just been killed. Why did he leave this job? Was it going to try to eat it? This is short, I'm sorry. I just thought I'd tell you about this. Howdy everybody. My family's relationship with the Dogman in the southeast of the United States is kind of strange. M has always been my home. My family, on the other hand, came from Louisiana. My family, including my grandpa, were, put it in carny and treepreneurs. The best way I can write his accent. Anyway, when our family came from Cuba, we started our little carnival act, which, thankfully, is no longer an act. Around 1898, they traveled all over the South to perform and work on farms and plantations that had closed down. During this time, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great. He never really talked about it, but soon after that, people in my family started to hear about Dogma. When my grandfather was young, he and his family traveled with a carnival. At night, he said, the beast would walk around their camps. He has a lot of stories that I might tell you about later, but he has a lot of dementia, so you should take them with a grain of salt. My dad used to put up telephone poles as part of his job in the phone business. He was up on Gambrel Mountain doing maintenance one night. As he drove back down the mountain, he saw about 3 dog men running next to his truck and staring at him through the windows. My life has been a bit more complicated. I've been hunting in the mountains near where I live for a long time, and every time I go out, I see one of them. Most of the time, they're just far away or walking along the riverbanks to get water. I wanted to know if anyone else has any idea why they seem to be following my family around. A few years ago, I was out setting up a deer stand. I had to hike in and find the right tree for it. I made sure to clear a lot of space and do other things. I saw something between me and the mini king that I can't explain. It was a tall, straight, black figure that looked like it had a nose and perky ears. I don't know what I was looking at, but whatever it was watching me through the trees, and then I realized it was looking at me. It kept looking at me, and then it seemed to just vanish into the brush. It was weird. I'd never seen anything like that before, so at first I thought it was just a big black bear looking at me. But it didn't look right. It was thin and looked more like a dog than a bear. I went back to that area and hunted there for the rest of the season without any problems. But sometimes I wonder if there are any animals in Oklahoma that have not yet been found. This happened to me when I was a kid. To tell you how many years ago the camping trip was, I'd have to ask my parents when it was. But I can tell you it was at least 10 years ago. Now, I'm going to use some strange words to describe the place. I used words like wooded and wilderness reserve because I didn't know what the best words were. A friend from church asked me to join his family on a camping trip to Oasis State Park, which is in the middle of the woods. Of course, since it was my best friend and his family, and they had always been nice to me, I said yes. Before that, I hadn't camped very often. So, the idea of going camping with a friend and his family sounded great. So we started getting ready for a weekend when I wouldn't have to work. I got my own tent, sleeping bag, and everything else I would need. Once everyone was there, the friend's dad picked me up, and my parents said goodbye. I remember quite a few things about that trip. The amazing, dangerous, but beautiful landscape of New Mexico, with its plateaus and campsite. People don't usually dream about camping in the New Mexican wilderness, as far as I know, but Oasis State Park is different. Even though the best campsites are always taken, all of the campsites are nice. There's a nice lake, a lot of animals, and, as much as I hate to say it, more trees than I've ever seen in town. Yeah, I know that when most people think of New Mexico, they don't picture a lot of trees. This is because trees aren't very common in the plains unless people plant them. Because I want to keep this short, I'll just call Oasis the woods. So, we found a place to camp and started setting up our tents. By afternoon, the tents were set up, and my friend and I left his younger sister, who was so boring, to go explore the park. All of the memories are great. We saw a snake by the lake. It drank from the water and then quickly slithered away. We checked out a place. I remember it being a lot of sand. We saw a roadrunner going about its business. After lunch, we played all day and saw so many cool things that, by the end of the day, I didn't think anything bad could have happened. We did what we always did at the end of the day, which was to collect sticks and start a fire so we could eat s'mores and other things. And tell ghost stories, of course. Probably because my friend and I were kids, his sister was even younger, and his father was the lead singer at our church, none of the stories were scary. It didn't look good to make the kids cry. So, when I say ghost stories, I mean short jokes about ghosts that are meant to make us laugh more than cry. Yeah, it was stupid, but what did you think? Anyway, after the stories were told and the s'mores were eaten, my friend, his father, and his sister-in-law went to their tent and I went to mine. Now, I'll talk about how to set up this setup. All of this will be important. My tent was on one side of the plot, and my friend's was on the other. This was done to keep things private. Now, there was a small path at my end of the plot that went through thick brush to the lake. Also, there was a small tree about 3 feet from my tent. I don't know what kind of tree it was, but it was still small and young. The trail to the lake was to the left of the entrance to my tent, and the lake was behind it. A thin line of trees was across the trail from my tent. The bathroom was at the end of that path in front of my tent. So I went to bed with no fear at all. And before I did, I urinated on a tree outside my tent because I was too lazy to walk the 2 minutes to the bathroom when nature's toilet was right there. So, I finished putting up my tent for the night and climbed into my sleeping bag, ready to go to sleep. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke up, I had to go to the bathroom. It wasn't the kind of potting I could do on a tree, or at least not in a reasonable way, so I didn't want to be a moron and walk around in the dark, so I grabbed my little lantern and turned on my LED lantern and I unzipped the inner flap of my tent first, as if that little nylon net could protect me from what I was about to see. Now, I should tell you that coyote howls are often heard in New Mexico outside of the cities. It happens every night when you're camping. Even in a small town like Logan, you can hear the howls from your bedroom. When you're in a house, it's not as scary. But when you got some flimsy nylon walls to protect you and that's it. Well, it's not exactly a soothing sound. As I opened the flap of my tent, a few howls were heard, but they were far away and not scary. I stopped moving when I heard a very loud howl coming from the lake, which was no more than a yard from my tent. This howl was different. It sounded like a coyote howl, but it was deeper and lasted longer. I just sat there in shock after hearing what I had heard. I wouldn't be able to guess at how long I sat there breathing hard with my fingers still grasping at the zipper, but however long it may have been, was just long enough for the thing that made the howl to come up the trail next to my tent. I suddenly heard the sound of claws digging into the ground, and then I heard them clacking on the rocks that were our campsites. Then I saw the biggest shadow a living thing had ever cast that I had ever seen as a kid. It moved slowly toward the thin line of trees, where I thought the other howling had come from. But I peed on it before it got past the tree. It ended. I didn't realize until then that I was both lit up like a candle and hadn't been trying to stop my heavy breathing. By then, it was too late, as the huge thing had moved closer to the tree and into the light of my lantern. At that distance, the little LED light was barely bright enough to see details. I'd like to note a very few important details that stuck out to me as odd. It was about the same color as a coyote, but the Dogman head shape with the tiny, pointed ears didn't make sense. It also made weird noises when it got down on all fours in front of my tent, like joints popping against each other. I can only guess that the knees broke out of the standing joints and landed in other joints to support the body on all fours. It didn't pay much attention to the clearly scared kid in my tent as it cut down the tree I had peed on earlier. The breasts were about the size of a dog's butt, but they were much longer and deeper, almost like a horse's. Then it turned to look at me and looked right into my eyes. Its eyes didn't shine or look into my soul, but they were so strange that I couldn't believe it. I saw a hunter in those eyes more than anything else. Have you ever been in a place where you could see the beast's eyes? Is there anyone stronger than you? You know, something could just kill you, and it knows that you've been looking for so long that I thought for sure I'd just be a bloody stain. By the time someone got to my tent, yelling wouldn't help, and I didn't think a gun could hurt this thing. But despite everything I felt in my gut and the fear I felt knowing it was a predator and I was its prey, I didn't run away. I didn't die. Instead, it turned slowly, ever so slowly, and just ran into the woods. It was gone into the night faster than it came. One of my friends knows, and he jokes that it was my piss on that tree that made it happen. Like I made a mark on my land or something stupid like that. Or maybe it just wasn't hungry, or most improbable, it had just enough morals to not kill a kid. I'll never know for sure, and it goes without saying that I don't go to the bathroom. Instead, I put away my lantern, closed the flap of my tent, and held it in all night. I don't remember sleeping that night. I may have or may not have, but if I did, it wasn't a dream. I do remember that I tried to keep this from my friend and his family the next day when I asked if they had heard any howling. Even though they heard the howling, they told me they didn't care. I was told to ignore it when I thought it was a coyote doing coyote things, as if I were a city kid who had never heard a coyote howl before. The next day I stayed as close to my friend as possible while exploring and had nearly forgotten the encounter by lunch somehow. I had forgotten about the beast all day because I felt safe, until we found its tracks in that very sandy place. Coyote paw prints. I think seeing those tracks proved to me that it wasn't just a dream, and because of that, I was scared enough that night to convince my friends and family to let me sleep in their tent, even though it was warmer and there was an adult and 2 other people there. That night, I still couldn't sleep. I'd almost fall asleep, and then the next day I'd hear a howl. I pretended to be sick so my mom would come pick me up a day or 2 early. It was the worst camping trip of my life. Not only did it ruin my entire summer, but it also ruined camping. Since then, I haven't gone camping alone, and I don't plan to. Even so, I'm never at ease when I'm always on the lookout for strange sounds and acting suspicious. This really made me feel bad. I guess being forced to see that human top of the food chain is utterly powerless in front of such a beast. Seriously, I don't think I can push hard enough to make everyone understand how helpless I felt. Even now, when I think about this, I remember 2 things. First, those eyes and that feeling, just writing. This sent multiple shivers up my spine. Okay, everybody. So, I ran into. Well, I don't know what it was because I never saw it, but it seems to fit with what I've read here and elsewhere. So here it goes. It was just before Halloween, about 2 weeks ago. First, let me say that I'm not a big fan of being outside. I love hiking and I'm spent countless hours in my city's 16 square miles, state park nature reserve, whatever you want to call it. But I'm definitely not a mountain man. The park is home to many native mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles. It also has a full pond, thick brush, and in some places, swampy marshes. There are trails for hiking and biking all over the area, but there are also some wild areas that aren't really taken care of or used. I like to be adventurous, but I hate being in groups of people. I spend a lot of time in these less traveled or wild places. Now, it's important to say that this park has never really made me feel unsafe. It reminds me of a place where I feel safe. I go there when I want to get away, relax after work, or just be by myself. In a way, it can feel like a second home. Anyway, enough background information, I'm rambling. I just pulled up to one of the less used fishing ponds, Beaver Lake. I usually circled the far side on one of the hiking trails that goes right next to the tree line, then into the tree line, and then further back on one of the old horse trails. Now, people don't use this horse trail as much as they used to. I can't say for sure why, but different people have given me a lot of different ideas. The most likely reason is that it's not as easy to get to anymore, and when it rains, it gets pretty muddy. I could stay on the normal hiking trail for the first 3/4 of a mile, but I'd have to leave it when it went into the trees. About 500 yards to my 9 o'clock was the gate to the old horse trail. I went through an overgrown thicket and up a small hill to get to the 4-foot gate and start exploring. I had about an hour and a half left until it got dark, and I never go into the woods at night. So, I kept an eye on the time. The main reason I went on this trip was to take pictures of the area for a project I was working on, but I was more distracted than usual. Anyway, nearly an hour had gone by. I had gotten some good shots, so I thought it was time to attack. It would take me about 30 minutes to walk back to my truck, and I didn't want to get stuck in a strange place at night. I put my backpack on a stump, got down on one knee, and started packing and putting away my things. I don't know what made me feel this terrible fear all of a sudden, but it did. I slowly turned around and looked around me. Nothing didn't make sense. When I took a step forward, I got up and grabbed my bag. When a leaf crunched under my foot, I realized it was very quiet. Now, as I already said, I'm not a big fan of the outdoors by any means, but I know enough to know that silence like this means a predator is nearby and you should leave the area quickly but calmly and stay alert. Even though mountain lions and black bears are native to my area, there have been more than enough caught and moved to make this a legitimate concern. I've been followed by a mountain lion before, and this felt a lot like that. So that was the first thing I thought about. I've been moving for about 5 minutes, and everything seemed fine. I had convinced myself that I was just being too sensitive and that everything was fine. Nothing was there? I didn't hear anything good. Wrong, well, right. At this point, both sides of the trail were completely overgrown. I could see pretty well behind me, and a good distance in front of me. But the walls to my left and right might as well have been autumn colors. I must have gotten lost and stopped to think for a second, because I tripped on a root and ate shit as I got up. Off to my right, I heard a soft, I don't know if it was cooing or chattering. It sounded like a mix of a dove and a bird of prey. It would start with a coo or yelp and end with a strange chattering sound. I'm actually trying to do it right now, and I sound like a fool. I'm not sure if my throat could even make it sound right. Also, I'm out of shape, so I'm not going to run anything. So I scrambled up, put my feet down, and tried to look as scary as a fat 22-year-old with a backpack and glasses can look about 100 yards ahead of me, which would have been behind me if I hadn't fallen so that I was moving away from where I was taking pictures. I saw the bushes start to move and hear what sounded like something tearing through them. At this point, there might have been 20 minutes of daylight left, and it would take me at least that long to get back to my truck. So I did exactly what you shouldn't do in real life. I turned around and ran as fast as I could, even though I knew I could only run for maybe a half mile or 3/4 of a mile. If something is trying to kill me, I might not have been able to hear it over the sound of my own feet and my heart beating, but whatever it was following me through the bushes and getting closer. At this point, it might have been 15 yards behind me, and I still had a long way to go. I don't know if I kept going because of fear or what, but I got to the deeper and just kept running. I could barely breathe. I could no longer see clearly, and I was about to pass out when I saw the gate to the horse trail about 300 yards ahead of me. This thing is right on top of me now, and as soon as I could reach the gate with my arm, I put my foot on the bottom rung and jumped over it. My landing wasn't very smooth. I landed on my right shoulder and rolled down the hill for a few yards before landing in a muddy puddle. I couldn't think straight, so I got up and walked shakily toward the line of trees and the pond. I already knew which way to go, so I didn't even try to find the hiking trail. I just crashed through the bushes and weeds like a barbarian. I didn't care about getting cut or scraped, or even about how loud it was. I was making. All I could think about was getting out. The chattering sounds had stopped, but I could still hear something moving in the brush at the top of the hill. It no longer tried to be quiet either. I finally got past the trees and could see where my truck was parked at the top of the hill, across the pond. I took a deep breath and slowly started walking away from the tree line. The feeling of danger had gone away, so I started walking up the trail along the tree line. I had about 15 seconds to catch my breath. I turned around to look at the tree line behind me when I heard that god-awful cooing and clucking again. So when I got to the point where there was a trail leading into the tree line in front of me, a tree line to my right and water to my left, and a trail going along the tree line and around the pond to the cars behind me, the underbrush of the tree line in front of me started to shake, and fear took over. I jumped into the pond and swam across, so I'm glad my bag is waterproof and my phone can handle water. In my own life, I have never really told this story to anyone. They probably think I'm crazy, and I don't think they would trust or believe me. Even more so because I am interested in Bigfoot, and other mysterious creatures. I have no idea what was following me around that day. I know I got cold, wet, and a little bit scared. I also know that I've been back to the park, at least to that part of the park, but I don't know why. I can't go to Beaver Lake for a while. I think I'll just keep exploring and hanging out on the side of the park where there are a few more people. I was looking for black powder all by myself on private land. The property has a gated entrance, which is where I usually left my four-wheeler and walked the last 200 yards to my elevated deer stand. As I turned off my four-wheeler and put on my backpack, I heard a very large branch break. I thought it was a deer or other animal just 20 yards away moving around. So I didn't give it much thought, got my gun and hunting gear, and started walking down the 2-track trail without turning on my flashlight because the moonlight was enough to see where I was going. I'd been hunting here for a long time, so I knew the way. This trail led to a 15-acre field of hay that was surrounded by old-growth forest. As I walked in the dark, I quickly realized that something in the woods was following my every step. When I walked and stopped, it did the same thing. When I realized I might have a problem, it was too late to go back to the four-wheeler. So I ran faster and went straight to my tree stand. When I was about 10 yards away from the stand, I heard another big branch break close to the field's edge on my left. I stopped, turned on my flashlight, and shined it in that direction. I saw two glowing green eyes that were about 10 inches apart. I yelled and stomped my foot while raising my rifle. "Leave this place." I'm not sure what I was trying to say. It just blinked its eyes once and didn't move. I can't make out any details, but I think it was hunched over because its eyes were close to the ground. Whatever it was, it didn't run like most animals that don't hunt. I knew right away that the best thing to do was to quickly lock up my ladder and get into the stand. This thing was no more than 8 steps away, and if I shot at it, the muzzle flash would have blinded me, and if I missed in the dark without a way to quickly reload, it might have attacked. I made an evasive move. The rest of the time I waited in the stand until daybreak. It circled my stand just out of the light. About a minute before daybreak, I heard footsteps going into the woods where it had followed me from. I waited until daylight and quickly made my way back to my four-wheeler. I hopped on it, and just as I was about to start it up, I heard a loud crack in the woods behind me. I left the area and went home, cutting short the week-long hunt. I didn't go back until the next spring. Since then, I've changed the way I hunt and only go into the woods on foot before dark if I have to. And if I do, I always have a second gun with me. I sold that property a while ago, and now I hunt in my home state of Indiana, and I can say for sure one thing. If I had had a shotgun or a high-powered rifle with more than one shot in my hands that day, I would have felt threatened enough to use it. This thing wasn't scared of me at all, and it changed the way I look at woods and forests forever. Now that I think about that morning and the days before it, I remember that I hadn't seen any of the usual signs of wildlife or visual activity that I usually see. So, this took place in 2010. At the time, I was 10 years old. At this time, there was a snowstorm. It came out of nowhere and hit our city, where the weather is known to be unpredictable and winters are often late. During this time, I lived with my cousins. The blizzard lasted for a while, with thick, freezing snow. This blizzard came out of nowhere, so no one was ready for it. The power went out. People are buying up all of the water and stores. I saw on the news that people were putting barbecue grills inside their houses to keep warm. Even though we lived in apartments, we were lucky enough to have our power on and other things we needed. This is how this blizzard affected us. It was so cold that trees began to fall. I lived next to a big pond, so if you went out on our balcony, you would be in water. That was frozen, though. So, I don't want to play in the snow because I'm 10 years old. So, my 18-year-old cousin and I played in the snow during the day. We did that almost every day when we were bored. But one day, he and I went outside and stood in the parking lot in front of my apartment. The only difference was that we went to play in the snow at 6 o'clock in the evening. And because of daylight savings time, it was already dark. When it snows, we wait until it stops to go outside. So we built snowmen and walls like normal kids do. You can do anything normal in the snow. So, we decided to try to build a wall out of snow. So there had to be a lot of snow. Now that it has been snowing a lot, where are the best places to clear snow off of cars that haven't moved? We start building this wall, and I'm shoveling thick layers of snow off the trunks of cars. After getting snow off the cars and bringing it to the wall we were building, it was the easiest place to get a piece of snow. I see that I haven't done anything to the car that my sister's boyfriend drives. Wow, that's a lot of snow? Since days ago, they haven't left. I tell my cousin, let's go get that snow together. We were walking toward the car that my sister's boyfriend drives, and now we're there. We get to the trunk, and as soon as I pick up a big 2-armful of snow, I hear a very loud click. I look all around, then down, and then around the car. A green light in the shape of a circle is around my cousin and me. Now, this is strange enough that I looked up to see where the light was coming from, and what do you know? There was nothing above us. So, when I saw the light and realized there was nothing above us, I looked at my cousin and started running home. I'm scared, so I'm running and looking everywhere. As I'm running home and looking around, I see a tree fall in the distance. Yes, it was cold, as I said before, but that's not unusual during a blizzard. But for this to happen at the same time as this strange event gave me even more chills. My cousin and I went inside, where his sister and my sister were cooking. We Russians went crazy, and now they want to know what's wrong. We told you what happened and how it happened, and what do you know? Just like anyone else who hears stories like these. They called us stupid, crazy, and told us to stop playing, among other things. Okay. They don't believe us, so don't worry about it. Who would think that anyone would know anything else the rest of that night? My cousin and I are always looking out the window. We couldn't get anything out of our heads, so we stayed up all night and kept looking out the window. We played Black Ops until about 7 o'clock in the morning. Still looking out the window every 5 minutes. We weren't going to forget about this, let alone lie about it to this day. He still thinks about this moment. That was supposed to be normal fun, but it turned into a scary alien sighting, and I think I'm 18 now. But I've thought about it a lot since then, so I still remember every detail. It's not an easy thing to forget. When I see my cousin, we talk about this from time to time. But man, that thing was weird. Look, I know you won't believe me, but I've been thinking about this for too long. I just can't believe it myself, so I can't keep it to myself. I'm here to talk about what I've learned and to hear what other people think. What did you think, and what could it be? Why did it target us? Why hasn't it changed anything? I have too many questions that haven't been answered, and I don't think they ever will be. I will just have to deal with that fact. To paint a picture of this. All through my childhood, I was born in 2002. I was crazy about fairies. I started getting pieces of paper and writing notes to fairies at some point. I would stick them all over my house in fairy places. I had one above my bed, and the last one I put up before I saw the fairies was on a chair on my porch. I always asked them to come visit. I remember that they finally came at 3:10 a.m. one night. I woke up out of the blue and saw tiny balls of light around the stacks of books I kept in my bed until this happened. I had always thought that fairies looked like small people with wings. I can't remember if one or more of them were singing. I remember the lights were red, orange, and yellow. I had always wanted to meet them, but after a few seconds I screamed, ran to my parents' room, and slept in their bed the next day. I drew what the light looked like and showed it to my parents. I don't think I still have the photos, but I'm going to look for them soon. I'm going to spend the winter trying to figure out what happened and if I can contact the fairies again. Everything I've read online about people meeting fairies describes them as people. Do you think that the balls of light weren't fairies? Also, some people think what happened was a dream because I like fairies and it happened at night, but you have to believe me that it was real. About 7 years ago, this happened to me and my stepbrother. My grandfather owns about 40 acres of woods, and he took us there. When he fell asleep, my brother and I did the most typical thing: we went into the woods without telling my grandfather. We had been walking for about an hour when we saw a piece of metal hanging from barbed wire. We were worried but still interested. Now we're deep in the woods, and we see a big tree up ahead. We run up to it, and there are dead cows and their guts all over the tree. We were scared at this point, so we started to run back the way we came. As we ran, something was following us until we reached the barbed wire, where it stopped. We got back home and told my grandpa what happened, but he didn't believe us. A few weeks later, one of my cousins went hunting out there. Their truck got stuck in the mud, so they left it there overnight. When they came back, it had been set on fire 3 to 4 miles away in the middle of the woods. I planned to go there with a few friends and a few guns. Have any tips? It looks like this is the only place I might be able to find some answers. In the early 1990s, when I was a little boy, I lived in Bandy Town, Boone County, West Virginia. I remember being friends with a neighborhood boy who was killed while he and his older brother were playing in the woods. During play, the older brother said he had seen a huge black cat run up to his brother, grab him by the head or neck, and run away with him. When they found his little body, they didn't know where the cat had gone. From what I heard, it was pretty bad. His neck was broken, and his face was partly eaten. But no one really believed the older brother's story about a panther, so officials just said it was a bear attack. Even though everyone was in agreement that it didn't look like a typical bear attack, which was common where I grew up. During the hunt, they never found the animal. So, parents in the area were much more worried about us playing outside, and no one I knew was allowed to play outside at night anymore because the old people said they heard what sounded like a baby crying or a woman screaming deep in the mountains behind their homes. But a few months after the boy's funeral, things calmed down a bit, and I remember playing in an old empty lot near my house next to a big mountain. I was probably playing on the ground with a gardener snake or a bug when I heard what sounded like grunts. This got my attention, so I turned my head and saw a big, skinny black animal that looked like a panther standing up in the tall weeds about 20 to 30 feet away, behind the fence that separated the lot from the mountain. I'd never seen anything like this before. I don't remember everything about it, but its snout was long and chunky, almost like a dog's, not like a cougar or cheetah's. Its tail was very long, and it stayed in a J-like shape while it watched me for a while, with its head low to the ground and its mouth slightly open. But my screaming and hollering scared it away or made it lose interest, because it didn't take long after I started hollering for it to turn around and shoot back up the side of the mountain and out of sight. To this day, I bet everything I own that what I saw was the same thing that grabbed that little boy, because I only lived about 10 to 15 houses down from where he did and was playing. I remember when Monster Quest was still on the History Channel, they did an episode about big cats in the Appalachians. They showed a few pictures of what was said to be black panthers that had been seen in West Virginia and the Appalachians. It hurt me a lot and brought back a lot of bad memories, to put it mildly. Please don't forget to be polite. Talking about the death of a child is never easy. I used to drive a mail truck, but I quit because I broke my hip on the job and had other health problems. I couldn't go back to work, which was probably for the best because I saw something on the job I still can't explain. 10 years ago, I moved from Oregon to a small town near Tulsa, Oklahoma, and got a job driving a mail truck. The route I had was mostly in the country, and had a big loop to drive around. It was mostly wooded, and when I got to this one mailbox near the end of my route, I always had a bad feeling. It was a gravel road in Poland, with wide open fields on both sides and a lot of wild land all around. To say the least, it was creepy. Because the driveway went up and down a hill, you could never see the houses. It was a pretty dead road in general, and I drove on it. Like I said, getting out of my truck to drop off the mail always gave me the creeps. I always felt like I was being closely watched. I didn't like it. I hadn't even been on my route for 2 weeks when I had my first adventure. I remember this day, and I remember that the weather felt different, like a storm was coming. Because this is Oklahoma, the humidity and moisture in the air were stronger than usual. When I got out of my truck to walk to the mailbox to drop off the mail, I felt something to my right. I look over, and they aren't even 100 feet away. The biggest animal I've ever seen is in the middle of the field. At first, I thought it was a lion because of its size and what looked like a mane of fur around its head. But as I looked at it longer, I saw that it looked a lot like a dog. It was just sitting there like a dog, but it was staring right at me. I've never seen a stare like that have so much power. At that moment, fear hit me hard, and I didn't feel safe. I dropped off the mail and quickly left the area to get to my next destination, which was far away. I was away from it. It was hard to tell exactly what was going on, but I could tell you enough. The thing wasn't a bear. The head, ears, face, and shape of the body all made it look like a dog. It didn't have a bear-like shape. Normally, it was much thinner, so I kept working that route for another month, but I never saw this big black lion dog thing again. Then I got a new route, and my old one was taken over by someone else. I had the new route, but I broke my hip and had to give it up. Anyway. Do what you want with it. I saw exactly that. My girlfriend and I had what I thought was an encounter with a Dogman back in 2017. We only spent a few days in Pryor Creek, Oklahoma. We got there on a Thursday and stayed until the following Sunday because we were there for a wedding on Saturday. We wanted to spend the rest of Thursday and all of Friday looking around and seeing interesting things. Because we had the time. The town of Pryor Creek is small. I mean that there are less than 10,000 people in the whole city. On Saturday, my girlfriend and I decided to go check out the nearby Pryor Creek Nature Trail. We wanted to get outside and go hiking, and a nature trail seemed like the best way to do that. It's more than 3 miles of long back trail, and a river runs along it. We went around 9 AM, and as we walked along the trail, my girlfriend pointed out something and motioned for me to look. We saw a black animal that looked like a wolf bend over and drink from the river. It was a huge amount. My girlfriend started to breathe too fast. After looking at it for a few seconds through the trees, it turned its head and saw us. Near the creek bed, it was only about 50 feet away. It was really big and looked like a big wolf. Then it stood up 2 feet, at which point my girlfriend and I ran screaming back to the car. I didn't know it at the time, but I think it was called the Dogman. I just thought it was a real-life werewolf. I didn't think they would be so very big. I never really thought about whether or not these things were real. I remember that after that, we tried to find out if other people had also seen werewolves. And based on what we said, it turns out that many other people have seen the same kind of creature, which has been called the Dogman. I don't know much about these animals other than what I've seen, but I do know that I never want to be near them. Again, this took place in June 2016. I had just broken up with the woman I had been with for 8 years, and it had been very hard. I wanted to get away for a while. One of my best friends has a really nice log cabin just outside of Colorado Springs, in the middle of nowhere. I asked him if it was okay if I stayed there for a couple of weeks to clear my head, and of course he said it was fine. I remember that when I went to get the key from him, he bragged about how peaceful and nice the whole cabin is. I had never been there, but I knew that he and his parents had been there several times when we were kids. This cabin is also said to have a nice pond with lots of wildlife, including deer and other animals. I know that his father has hunted up there more than once because he has brought back a lot of deer meat that he turned into back straps, sausage jerky, and other things. And some of it was even given to me. Anyway, I'm rambling. Sorry, I just wanted to set up the story for you. Long story short, I'll be going up there in the next day or so, and it's as peaceful as ever. But I don't know how to explain what happened to me. No man, no matter how experienced, ever goes into the wilderness without a sophisticated weapon. I chose a shotgun with a 12 gauge. It might not have been the best thing to do, but I thought it would scare away anything that could be dangerous to me. I didn't think I'd be in any real danger while I'm up here. So maybe I wasn't careful enough. I got settled in the cabin and just enjoyed the peace and quiet and the view. Night came pretty quickly, and I remember that at night, the sounds of the forest and nature outside were so loud that you could just sit by the window and listen to the crickets sing and make a chorus. It was lovely. After reading on the couch, I went to sleep and woke up in the middle of the night. I had goosebumps and felt like something bad was about to happen, but I didn't know what. It was the weirdest feeling. It took me a few seconds to notice that the sounds outside had stopped. I couldn't see much when I looked out the window because it was pretty dark and there must have been a lot of clouds. I knew right away that something wasn't right. I was just coming to the end of that thought when I heard something very heavy walking along the side of the cabin. It didn't sound like a normal animal. The sound of the footsteps was weird, like someone was walking on two legs. Then, at some point, it stopped outside the cabin, and it sounded like someone was trying to get in. So I ran to my bedroom, where I had put my shotgun, to get it. I was ready for anything as I sat on the bedroom floor with the gun in my hand, but nothing happened. After a few moments of silence, I started to hear what I can only describe as a deep scratching on the front door. My heart felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. I was scared to death. I thought some huge, ripped mass murderer was going to kill me and was just messing with me by carving things in the front door with this huge elephant knife. I was ready for war and had my gun pointed right at the door, but as soon as it started, it was over. I sat there on edge for another hour or more with a gun pointed at the doorway. I can only guess that's what happened because I had no idea what time was. After being tired of just sitting there with a gun all night, it was still very quiet outside. I must have fallen asleep because when I woke up in the morning, I knew what had happened the night before. I wanted to run outside to see if I could see any footprints or other signs. I thought that if I could find footprints, they might show me where this person came from. As I stepped out of the cabin, I almost screamed when I saw the claw marks that looked the deepest and most painful I'd ever seen. It looked like a bear had torn up the front door, leaving marks about 4 feet long that looked like claw marks. Lucky for me, this had to be done by something with a lot of power. The ground was a little bit wet and muddy, but it was still pretty dry and clear outside, so I thought there was no way I wouldn't be able to find footprints. However, because the front door was right next to a slab of concrete, there were no footprints or anything else that didn't look normal. But when I walked around to the side of the cabin, I saw what I can only describe as big dog prints in the mud that led along the side of the cabin. This made me even more confused because I thought either the psycho killer had a big dog with him, or a big dog was trying to get into the house. I wasn't quite convinced, so I decided to keep standing my ground and not let anyone or anything scare me away from my much-needed alone time. The next few nights were mostly calm and uneventful. There wasn't anything really out of the ordinary. As the days went by, I started to forget about it all, and if I did think about it, I would tell myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. Or maybe it was just the huge amount of stress from breaking up. I know that stress can affect the brain in a lot of ways, so I thought I had made it all up. When I left, I think it was the fourth or fifth night. I was sitting on the couch reading at about sundown, and I could clearly hear what sounded like a very large animal running very quickly through the woods toward the cabin. The best way I can describe it is like a rumbling sound that sounds like an animal running. It kept getting closer and closer, and then all of a sudden, the whole cabin shook so hard it felt like someone had just driven a car into it. It almost gave me a heart attack. I jumped off the couch, and as I was trying to get up, my eyes went straight to the nearest window, where a dog's face was staring down at me. Big teeth and bright red eyes. And this thing's face had what I could only describe as a smile. I started to yell. I'd never seen a dog that looked like that, and I'd never had a dog grin at me. These windows were about 8 feet off the ground, and the head of this thing filled the whole window as it looked down at me. I ran back to the bedroom to get my shotgun, and then I waited again in the bedroom for this thing to break in and try to get me. I waited again, but nothing happened at some point or another. I came up with a great idea in my head. Instead of being stuck in that room with this thing outside, I would run as fast as I could to my car outside and drive away. It was my only chance to get away, and I didn't want this horrible-looking animal to tear me apart. I felt like it took me hours to get up the courage to do this. But it probably only took about 20 minutes, just like a runner. I got on the ground, counted to 3, and ran as fast as I could with the gun in my hand to the door and then to the car. I'm surprised I didn't drop my keys like in every Hollywood movie, but the stars were aligned for me at that moment, and the keys went in. I jumped in the car quickly, locked all the doors and windows, and sped off. When I turned my car around and looked up, my jaw dropped. Standing 30 feet away, fully visible in the light from my headlights, was a strange-looking animal that stood upright and looked like an ugly dog. It was grey, had dog-like hawks on its head, and a strangely shaped back. Its body looked like that of a hyena, but when it stood up, it put its hands up in front of its face, just like a person would do. I did have my brights on, so I may have partially blinded it. I don't know if I was on autopilot, but I slammed on the reverse so hard and flew down that driveway to the main road, using my side mirrors to see where I was going. I don't think this thing ever followed me, and after I saw it, I didn't want to look up and see it again. From the gravel road I was on to my friend's house was about a 3-hour drive. It was late, but I didn't care. In fact, I probably ruined my tires by going so fast down the gravel road, but I didn't care. I put the pedal to the metal and saved about 30 minutes of driving time by going faster than I should have. I remember knocking on my friend's door and pushing my way in when he opened it. I was so scared and frantic, but he didn't care. He was mad that I was knocking on his door in the middle of the night, and he could tell because I was talking so fast. I told him what was going on, but I don't think he wanted to hear it. He told me to shut up and sleep on his couch if I had to, and that we'd talk about. I felt bad and thanked him a lot, but with everything else going on that night, I only got a few hours of sleep. In fact, this upset me so much that I forgot about the breakup in that short amount of time. To make a long story short, I remembered it the next morning. He was a little bit smarter, so I was able to tell him everything that had happened. All he said was that his dad sometimes talked about seeing strange animals when he was hunting near the cabin, but he never went into detail. I'm sorry that this story was so long, but it had a lot of parts. I've never believed in anything besides what I can see, but I think it would be places like big forests, mountains, rivers, jungles, etc. There may be animals we haven't seen yet that look just as scared as I did. I now understand. I don't want to go into the woods by myself anymore. My husband and I have been seeing a large dog-like creature walk around the back of our property and steal our chickens and goats. I'm not sure what it is. My husband has shot at them more than once, and it seems like they always make things worse. We no longer have chickens at this house, and we're getting ready to leave and move. We first saw these things at the start of summer, in early July. I've heard that there are a lot of Bigfoot in this area. So when we first saw them from a distance, I just thought it was one of these things, even though they didn't look like a typical Bigfoot. They looked like huge black wolves that walked like people, on two legs. We didn't know what to think at all. After that, we didn't have to wait long to notice that our animals were slowly going missing. We found out that our chickens were either gone or had been killed. We would sometimes find our goats with their throats ripped out or torn and shredded. By early September, these things had gotten to the point where they had taken all of our livestock. We used to have 24 chickens and 7 goats, but now we don't have anything. My husband has tried to stop them by shooting at them, but it only seems to make them mad. They have tried to attack the house and get in before. In fact, there have been times during the week and on weekends when we had to leave the house for a few days in the hopes that the activity would stop and it would be safe. When we come back, more livestock are often gone than when we left. Along with our chickens and goats, we also had a few cats and dogs. They were among the first things to go. Back behind our house, there are a lot of woods, and my husband and I are too scared to even go back there. We worry that we don't have enough guns to deal with these things. We'll need it. Back in August 2008, I was at my girlfriend's house late at night. She lived out of town a little ways and not too far from a larger cemetery. This cemetery was very old, and I think it was at least 100 to 150 years old. If I remember correctly, there were graves from the Civil War there, which is why I'm bringing it up. Even though we went on a date there once, I had a strange feeling in the area, and I don't know what it was. Let's talk about the date first. It was a few months ago. We went to the graveyard and hung out there. We even did an EVP session, but that's not the point. She and I loved exploring and trying new things, so it was her idea to spend the night in the cemetery because it's fun and spooky to look at old gravestones and talk to ghosts. So far as I know, we both felt like we were being watched the whole time we were in there, which was very unsettling. We both laughed it off because a cemetery is just scary in general. So we gave up and did our EVP session and hung out anyway. But, of course, nothing really interesting happened during the EV session. There was no communication, nothing. Like I said, it's just a creepy place all around. I think the date was in late May. Fast forward to August and like I said I was driving to go see her and it was night time. As I pull up to the cemetery, I see 2 glowing yellow eyes a short distance inside the gate. At first glance, I saw that these eyes were attached to a huge mass that I couldn't make out much about. Initially I panicked and slowed the car down to immediately get a better look, and as my eyes adjusted to the low light I could see this thing looked like a Hollywood werewolf. I freaked out, but part of me tried to convince myself that this was just some prop or somebody in a costume waiting to prank someone, but it was watching me. It had followed my car as I slowly drove by looking at it. It scared me to death, and by the time I got to my friend's house, I had told her everything I had seen. She was more interested than scared, and she wanted to do some research to find out more. Let's skip ahead about a week. And I've kind of pushed the memory out of my memory bank. She calls me up and tells me that she has been doing a lot of research on the paranormal in the past week, and that what I saw is probably a Dogman. She came to that conclusion because apparently there's an Indian burial mound close by, or at least used to be until the area was deemed a residential zone back in the 50s and had houses and other stuff built onto it, like neighborhoods, commercial zones, businesses, etc. She said it actually looks like the cemetery itself could have possibly been built on part of that area that the burial mound was originally on. She said, though, that she couldn't find a clear answer. She told me more back in the 80s. I guess there was a huge problem with satanic worship in that same cemetery, huge problems with dogs and cats going missing in the neighborhood, graves being dug up and bodies being defiled with missing cadavers, along with various other black magic rituals that apparently took place. I didn't put too much stock in it because I wasn't sure about that myself. The only other strange thing she said that stood out to me was that people have seen wendigos in that area for the past 20 years or so. I didn't know what a wendigo was until she told me that, from what she knew, it was a tall, skeleton-like creature. Anyway, I think I saw a dog in that cemetery, man. This happened in the spring of 1997. At the time, I was in college and driving around town late at night. I guess the scariest thing about the whole story is that I saw this animal in town, which is something I thought you would only see in the middle of nowhere. But I guess that's not the case. The road I was on was pretty busy during the day, but there were parts of it where there were no houses or even commercial zoning. I was driving back alone in my 1993 Honda Accord when I had this encounter. When I came to an area of road where I saw this large black animal walking alongside the road, my first thought was that somebody had maybe lost a horse or something because this animal was just so large. But as my headlights illuminated more and I got closer, I could clearly see this was not a horse at all. It was not a cow, and it did not have the distinctive shape that a bear does. If that makes any sense. It was much longer and more defined. It was very dog-like, and it never once turned its head to look over at me. It was walking along the side of the road in the direction I was going, but it didn't seem to notice me. When I saw it, I thought, what the hell is that? I slowed down a lot to get a better look, but as I got closer, I saw what looked like scabs and mange all over its body, along with big patches of fur that were missing. That's when I noticed its head and face just a little bit more, and I chalked it up to being a really deformed coyote, except I'm pretty sure coyotes don't get anywhere near that size. This thing was a very big animal. The best way I can describe what I saw is that it looked like a really big, dirty coyote. It didn't quite look like a coyote, but it didn't quite look like a regular dog. I've never seen anything like it. It looked like it was missing chunks of fur and had sores all over its skin. Its skin was very dark, and it had way too many teeth for its mouth. The teeth looked like they came from a Swiss Army knife. They were so clear and sharp that even I could see how clear and sharp they were from where I was. This animal had to have been close to the size of a horse just in sheer size alone. I really thought it was a dog or a bear that had been hurt. It seemed so strange. I couldn't quite figure out what it was, but it had a lot of dog-like features that made it stand out to me. I was driving, so I didn't get a good look at the eyes, and I only had a few seconds to really look at everything I saw. The snout, ears, and teeth really stood out to me. Of course it did scare me. But I was more intrigued than anything else really. I tried to do a little digging and to see if I can find anything on it. But everything I read pointed to a dirty coyote or even the chupacabra, which looks a bit like what I saw but isn't nearly as big. Only a few people know what I saw, and they don't believe me, especially when I tell them how big it was. Gosh, it was so big, and I think that's what surprised me the most. I decided to keep researching, and that brought me to the topic of Dogman. This happened to me on the East Coast, and I've only researched just a little bit on the topic, but all that nonsense seems to point to the Midwest. I'm not sure if I believe something like that, since I don't even believe in Bigfoot, but I still can't explain what I saw. Maybe it was just a really big mange bear with a bad shape, and my mind is making it into something else. I've ran it through my head so many times and I just can't think of a single animal that even looks remotely like that in the Pennsylvania area. I actually live a bit outside of town in a very small single-wide trailer. I don't have much around me, and I only have a few neighbors who are spread out. You could say that the neighborhood where I live is spread out. I have a small yard in front of my house with a big maple tree that hangs over my front yard as well as the driveway. The small road that connects to the front of my house is a pretty intraversed road for the most part, not a whole lot of traffic, day or night. Beyond that is a large open field. I would say probably a few acres worth of just undeveloped land that sat there for quite a while. Beyond that is mostly wilderness and undeveloped land. Lately, I've had some really scary things happen where I live. The first time was just a few months ago, when I looked out my window and saw a tall, straight figure running toward my house. I was so scared that I locked all my windows and doors and called the police. Then, to my horror, the door handle starts shaking violently while I'm on the phone with the operator. I try to stay as calm as possible even though I think someone is trying to get in. Within 5 minutes, the police were there, but they couldn't find anything. I wasn't sure how to tell them that I saw a tall, straight-backed figure with pointed ears. Anyway, a few days later, I saw the same person walking around my house again. I was scared, so instead of calling the police, I hid in my bedroom and hoped they would go away. At the time, I thought this was a person trying to get into my house by jiggling the door handle harder and banging on the door and the side of the house. This person put paste all over for hours and hours. I don't know why I didn't think it was necessary to call the police this time, but that was probably my biggest mistake. After a few days, nothing happens. In fact, I think a whole few weeks went by without anything happening. And then again, I see this figure come up from the field again and I get a much better look at it since there's a street light not too far down the road that illuminates most of the road at night time, and what I saw horrifies me. This black shape, which I guess I'd call a person's shape, looks like a person, but it's much taller and has a dog's head and ears. I can only think that I might have been looking at a werewolf or something. I'm not sure. I didn't hear any noises or see any sights, but I could see the shape of this thing running quickly toward my house again. I called the police and asked them to send another officer to check out what was going on. Even though they got there in about 5 to 10 minutes, this thing had already gone. At this point, I started getting threats saying that I was making false claims. I was also told that if I called the police again about this issue, I would be detained and charged with a crime. At this point, I kind of knew that the police weren't going to do anything. So I keep waiting and waiting for this thing to come back so I can see it better. I don't have any guns or other weapons that can do a lot of damage, but I do have a baseball bat and some bear spray. So if this thing does break in, I should be ready. I really don't know what I'm up against, but I'll admit that I'm scared to death, especially since the police can't do much to help me in this situation. I've also asked other neighbors if they've seen something similar, but no one has really said anything like what I'm talking about. I tried to keep an eye on the field at night or at dusk, when it seems to be the most active. Again, though, I don't see anything. Most of the time, it only happens around midnight until something else happens. I don't always see it, but the few times I have, I happened to catch it as it was running toward my house. I don't know if this is a real werewolf or just a person in a costume, or what's going on. It hasn't happened in a few weeks, but, as I said, it has been happening on and off for the past few months. It always works the same way. This thing will walk up to my house, shake the door handle hard, bang on the door, bang on the house, pace around the house for a while, and then leave. Like nothing ever happened. I'm 29 years old now, but this happened to me when I was a young teen. I lived alone with my father in a more remote area with a lot of woods and forests behind us. We had a smaller house and lived on the edge of town. Our main source of heat was a wood stove. I spent a lot of time in the fall and winter splitting wood outside in a clearing on the backside of our property. I always split my wood on this really old, cool stump. My father would go cut down and cut up a bunch of old, dead trees for me. Then it was my job to split and stack all of the rounds. I did this for a very long time, but this isn't the point of my story. I'd like to start by saying that I do believe in the supernatural and things that can't be explained, and I still don't know what was watching me. I remember seeing it for the first time when I was splitting wood and had the feeling that someone was watching me and looking around. I quickly saw that a large animal that looked like a wolf was just watching me from the woods about 100 feet away. I don't know if it was just curious or trying to do something bad, but it just sat there as still as a statue and watched me split round after round of wood. I kept looking to see if it had moved closer to me or gone away, but it just stayed in the same place for hours. This thing didn't move at all. I'm not sure if it knew I could see it or not, but even though it was hidden by trees, I could still tell it was a large animal that looked like a wolf. At first, it scared me, but when it happened again and the thing just watched me, I realized it probably wasn't going to do anything since it hadn't done anything yet. I'm not sure, but sometimes I wonder if it would have come closer if I hadn't had a big splitting maul. Another strange thing is that it always showed up in the same place and stayed as still as possible for hours at a time. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared when my dad made me go outside and split wood. I wasn't sure if this thing was standing on two legs or not because all I could see was its huge body and huge wolf head watching me from far away. From what I can remember, it looked pretty shaggy and maybe more like a coyote because of the color of the fur on its face. I don't know why this animal was in the area, besides the fact that there were a lot of deer there at the time. I'm not an expert, so I don't know what those things eat, but I think it probably ate the deer, if that makes any sense. Since it was likely a hunter for a long time. I was sure that this thing was just waiting for the right time to attack. But after all those years of waiting and splitting wood, it never did. I never told my father what I saw because he is such a tough guy who doesn't put up with nonsense. I knew he would have thought I was crazy or trying to get out of work because he was too lazy to work. I do sometimes wonder, though, if he has ever had the same thing happen to him. I did, if I ever saw him out there cutting down trees or even chopping up old ones that were already dead. I should have probably asked him before he died. All of this happened mostly in the fall and winter, almost every year. I started splitting wood when I was around 12 years old, and I did it until I was 16 years old, when my family moved and I no longer lived there. It also makes me wonder why I never really saw this thing in the spring and summer, even though I don't remember ever going out and looking for it. No matter what, it just showed up whenever it wanted and watched me for as long as it wanted. I knew one thing for sure, no matter how many times I knew this thing was around me and watching me, I never felt like I could let my guard down because I was afraid this thing was waiting for the right time to attack. Maybe it just never happened at the right time. I worked in a very small hospital in a very small town in 2004. This hospital didn't have a lot of services, and even the room was pretty small. Most of the time, we couldn't give patients anything serious, which, looking back, was quite a few things. Because our hospital was so small and short-staffed, patients were often flown to other hospitals by life flight. The number of people on our security team, which I was a part of, was also pretty small. It was just me and this one other guy named Earl. Earl was older and funny, as far as I can remember. He was my boss at work and taught me how things worked when I first started. There wasn't much to learn, and luckily, this hospital is just a few blocks away from a neighborhood with a lot of undeveloped land and a good-sized parking lot. We didn't get a lot of foot traffic, but enough people came in and out to make it worthwhile. I've been lucky that I've never had to kick anyone out or deal with a bad person, but I have had some strange encounters with an animal I know nothing about. My first night shift at work. Earl told me that people sometimes saw a really big black dog walking and pacing around the parking lot. Staff, patients, and other people who were coming and going would be scared. I didn't realize he was serious about the job until about 2 weeks into it. I saw it with my own eyes. I was smoking a cigarette outside, and I think it was around 2 a.m. When I looked to my left, I saw this big animal walking around the parking lot's eastern part. I said to myself, what the hell? I had never seen a dog so large before. When I realized it was the same animal Earl had said he had seen, I radioed him and asked what the rules were for that. He didn't tell me that the police and animal control had already been called multiple times and that they couldn't do anything. I'm not sure how that could be true, but that's what I've been told. So I wasn't going to argue with my boss, since I didn't have a good reason to. I had to ignore it as best I could and go back inside. The strangest thing is that no one ever saw this animal during the day. I only knew about it because the night staff told me, and I saw it a few times when I was leaving the parking lot. People would often ask why there was such a big dog running loose in the parking lot. And sometimes the staff would come in white as a ghost and say that this thing had charged at them. It sounds like people around here have just learned to live with it, and not pay attention to it. It also didn't come out every night. No one would see it for days or even weeks at a time, and then all of a sudden it would be there again, just as it had been before. Sometimes it only walked around for an hour or less, but other times it seemed to walk all night, going in and out of the cameras, but it was always gone by the time the sun came up. There is one other night that really stands out. A man ran into us in a panic and told us that a big dog had attacked his car and that he had to run into the closest building, which was us. He talked about it like everyone else talks about the same animal we all see. So, since I was the only one on duty that night, I had to go check it out. His car was on the far side of the parking lot near the entrance. Other than a few scratches and dents, I didn't see anything too strange. Whoever hit his car, though, kept going after he left. As creepy as it was, it seems. It made me feel weird and didn't make me want to go outside for the rest of my job. I'm not saying that this thing is a hellhound or a ghost. I'm not saying this is even an alien, but it is definitely some kind of strange animal, and I don't know what to make of it all. To this day, I just try to follow IRL's best advice as best I can. If you see it, just leave it be. A few weeks ago, I met a real-life werewolf. I'm not very good at putting things away for the winter. So, I left my pool up and a bunch of other stuff in my backyard that I really should have taken down a long time ago. I finally decided a few weeks ago to go out there and put it in my shop. I go out there with a flashlight because it gets dark too early, and I quickly start to take apart my pool. Before I tell you what comes next, let me say that my backyard is very big. It's mostly just an open field that goes all the way across the land and into the state. At this time of year, game land. A lot of it is covered with dead leaves that have fallen from the nearby trees. When you wake up and look out the window in the morning, the view is absolutely stunning. There is a lot of open space, and there are big locust trees and other trees all around. We see a lot of deer in this area, mostly does, but I've seen a few bucks over the years. Most of the time, though, they're just little two-pointers that aren't quite ready. So I'm outside taking the legs off my big in-ground pool when I hear leaves crunching about 30 feet away. I pointed my flashlight at the place where I heard the crunch, and I almost threw up where I was standing. It looked like the Hulk from the comics was dressed as a werewolf. This thing was huge, with glowing amber eyes, huge teeth, a huge Conan, the barbarian chest, and rippling muscles underneath. It's because I could only look at it for a few seconds before I turned around and ran into my house. I locked every door and turned off all the lights, and my heart was pounding out of my chest. I didn't know what was going on. I just saw. My uncle has met Bigfoots in the past, and I might be able to get him to send you the story. So I know there are creatures we don't understand. I never heard any strange sounds or things after that. I kept turning off all the lights and locking everything for hours after that. The following morning, I made sure there was no one around where I was, took advantage of the daylight, and put that pool in my shop as soon as I could. I couldn't find any footprints or other possible signs of anything. What I saw the night before scared me to death. I feel like I've been able to figure out what's going on a little better as time has gone on. The first couple of nights, I couldn't sleep because I was trying to convince myself it was real. I didn't know who I could talk to about what I had seen, but I knew I had to do it. I called my uncle to tell him about it, and he believes me because I know he has seen Bigfoot and told me about it. He knows more about this than I do, and he told me that this animal was probably in the area because there is a lot of food and deer. I also forgot to say that a small canyon with a creek runs through the area just outside my backyard, which is a bit of a drop-off. So I guess my area is the best place to go hunting. You were safe, you had food and water, and no one really bothered you. I just hope that it doesn't come back. On my way home from a long business trip in the fall of 2013, I saw a strange-looking animal. I remember the details pretty well, and the whole thing has left me with some scars. I was driving from Michigan into Indiana on the 103, which goes south. Pigeon River is a small river that runs parallel to the road near the border. It's not a very big river, but it's close to the border. At the time, it was pretty late at night. I'm thinking around midnight or maybe a little bit later. At the time of the accident, I didn't really see anyone else on the road. And yes, I pulled up to the bridge and saw this huge Dogman stop halfway out into the road. I say Dogman because that's the only way I know how to describe what I saw. It had a lot of hair and was very shaggy. It stood about 8 feet tall. It was very big. It looked like a mix of a man and a dog. It had a head that looked like a German shepherd's, yellow eyes that lit up, and long claws on its hands. I saw it take one step into the road, turn around, and walk straight toward my car. I remember that when I saw what I was looking at, my jaw dropped in shock. This thing's face looked like a deer caught in headlights. It must have been surprised that I saw it because it was gone in half a second, quickly disappearing into the woods behind it. Everything moved so quickly. I needed a lot of time to figure out what had happened. I don't think I slowed down when I saw it because I was so shocked. It just turned and looked at me, then went away. I even told myself I was having a hallucination to try to convince myself that what I saw wasn't real, but it was, and it was, to say the least, very scary and made me feel very uncomfortable. The rest of the way home, I got really sick afterward, and even though I got home just a few hours later, I couldn't sleep well that night. I think what I saw was a monster, and now I know that they do exist. I couldn't imagine being the poor person whose car broke down right there by that bridge, where I saw it. I was afraid that this thing would follow me home and kill me. I told a few close friends who are interested in weird things like the paranormal about what happened. My one friend tells me that there have been a lot of other strange sightings in the same area, which I guess is the whole Michigan Peninsula area. I'm not sure if that's exactly what I saw, because some people might have thought it was a werewolf, but I don't think so. I'm not sure why it ran back into the woods when it saw my car. I don't know if it was trying to get somewhere, and if it was, maybe I scared it off. It almost looks like it didn't want to be seen and was trying to hide itself quickly. Everything about the whole thing just makes sense. I guess it makes sense, if you think about it, but I'm still, to put it mildly, uneasy. Anyway, this is what happened to me when I ran into you, and I want you to know that it's true. It's also hard for me because people are so quick to think you're crazy. I don't like to talk about my past experiences, especially this one, but I think it will be worth it this time. And hopefully, your listeners will be open to what you have to say. We appreciate your time. Even though I didn't see anything, I'm telling you this because it happened to me and my cousin. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about myself. My cousin moved to Idaho and has several hundred acres in the eastern part of the state. We are pretty close. My cousin loves being outside and hunts as much as he can on all the land he has. He's also pretty lucky because his land is full of deer, elk, and other good game. Also, there are a lot of old logging roads and big clearings where a lot of trees were cut down. To say the least, it's pretty cool. He's been through with me, and we've set up so many tree stands in that whole area, as well as scouted, hiked, and had great times together. Now, when I go to see him, I usually stay for 2 weeks at a time. I haven't stayed at his place in a few years. So, this happened when I went to see him in the fall a few years ago. He wanted to take me out into the woods one morning to look for good spots to put up a couple tree stands and do some good old-fashioned exploring. We got into a small pickup truck and drove around the backwoods to see if there were any good places to dig. We came across a pretty big clearing that had been made by loggers a long time ago. My cousin always brings binoculars because you can sometimes see if there is game in the area or nearby before setting up tree stands. He likes to check to see if there are any signs that deer and elk might be in the area. When we get to this clearing, he takes out his binoculars and looks around to see if there is anything we can see. We had already been thinking about setting up a stand in a couple of trees nearby. So it was a good day already. There was a lot of wind coming our way, so we didn't have to worry about anyone smelling us. My cousin got out of the back of his truck and started looking around. When he saw some does and a big buck checking out the area a little more, he got excited. He stopped moving, and his whole attitude changed from excitement to fear. I'm standing there looking right at his face, and something was wrong with the way he was looking. I got scared right away and thought that a bear with a cub was nearby. He stopped that thought by saying, "What the hell am I looking at?" And then whoa! A few seconds later, he quickly pulls down the binoculars and squints his eyes in the direction. He did nothing but look. He then throws the binoculars back up and his jaw drops open as he looks at whatever it is he's looking at. At this point, I'm kind of freaking out and want to know what the hell is going on. He doesn't say anything and just keeps watching. He quickly jumps out of the bed of his truck and tells me we need to leave right away, still thinking it was a mother bear and her cub. We left without even asking why. He took us back to his house. He didn't say a word the whole time, and he looked very upset. He had been in dangerous situations before, but he had never done anything like this. He even told me about a time when he fell out into the dark and was only 20 feet from a mountain lion that was so sick it was about to die, but he wasn't scared. So, we go back to his house and I finally get him to tell me what happened back there. I asked him if it was a bear, which is what I thought it was, but he just told me that he saw something he's never seen before. A timber wolf the size of a moose came out of the woods and attacked the buck. This animal was torn into pieces. I was confused and surprised by what he said, but I knew it had to be true. The look on his face told me he was scared. He was shaking the whole time he said, "This wolf tore that buck to pieces in just seconds," and he knew that wolves didn't get that big. I think he is telling the truth, and whatever he saw really upset him. Like I said, we didn't go exploring again the rest of the trip, and I'm not sure if he's ever been back to that clearing, but it really affected him, so I thought this would be a great thing to tell you. I chose to get in touch. I finally moved to Virginia almost 3 years ago after seeing something I can't even begin to describe. I started working the night shift at a huge complex with original colonial houses from the 1800s. People who live here will be able to figure out exactly where I'm talking about. I have been working here for about a year and a half. During the night, I check on every building and fix any HVAC equipment that needs it. When I think back to my first weird job, I remember how it was. When I first started working the graveyard shift, I heard a noise around 4 a.m. that I couldn't place. I don't get scared easily, and I like scary movies. It was a low-pitched growl. It sounded like it was right behind me in my office. I sat there in shock, not moving or turning around. When I finally got up the nerve to turn around and see what it was, there was nothing there. I tried to talk to my co-workers about the noise, but since I'm a young guy who likes to play jokes, no one really took me seriously. Trust me when I say that I ask a lot of questions and enjoy analyzing horror movies as a hobby. So, when I couldn't figure out what that sound was, I said it was the fridge. I have inside this. I haven't heard that noise again in well over a year. Recently, I've been getting to work early so I can take the scenic route and enjoy the fall colors and cool breeze. I've been pulling into the same spot for the past couple of weeks to smoke cigarettes and relax before going to work. Last week, when I pulled in and parked, I felt like something or someone was watching me from the tree line. The first 2 or 3 times it happened the rest of the week, I didn't think much of it. Now, this might sound like paranoia, but as a former cocaine addict, I know what paranoia is, so I can promise you that this isn't a dream. This kind of paranoia is based on trusting your gut. 3 days ago, I went back to flash my headlights and try to show who was boss so I could get my spot back. I also looked around to see if anything was going on. When I still didn't see anything, I shrugged it off and decided to park anyway. I didn't have that sinking feeling anymore, so I started to feel better. I put the cigarette between my lips, cracked my window about 8 inches, put my car in park, pulled out my lighter, and lit the cigarette while leaning in. All over my body, I feel cool, and the hair on the back of my neck stands up. As I look around the car, I look in the rearview mirror and see a white shape about 50 feet from the back of the car. I hit the brakes to light up the area and saw a tall, skinny creature with a long white face standing on its back legs about 20 feet behind my car. It was hunched over about 5 or 6 feet into the tree line. When I put my car in drive and sped off, I took a deep breath and almost coughed up a lung. I worked alone on the 2nd floor of a pretty safe building just a few days ago. I keep hearing what sounds like a grown man walking right under the window of my office, where I have my office. This only happens when I'm at work, but I think it won't be long before I can feel it at home, too. The more I read about what I saw and try to figure out what it was, the more I'm sure it was a wendigo. I'm starting to have dreams about it. Last night was the first time I had a dream about it. Being alone in Virginia gives me a lot of peace of mind about my family and the fact that they aren't in danger, even if I am. Sure as hell feels like I am. First, this happened to me when I was about 10 years old. I've lived in Idaho my whole life, and when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time outside or in the wild. My grandparents used to take me camping, and my older brother and I would always hike up whatever trails we could find to see the sunset. On one of these trips, something terrifying happened. We were at a campsite by a warm river, which I only know because the river there never freezes. And my brother and I were on one of our regular hikes in the evening. At one point on the trail, an old tunnel had been cut through the mountain. It was likely an old train tunnel. And as we walked through it, I heard something that will stay with me forever. After walking about 2/3 of the way through this tunnel, I heard a terrible screech at the end where we came in. The screech was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. On dark, windy nights, I've heard animals screaming. I think I've even heard Bigfoot call a few times, but I've never heard anything like the metallic, grinding sound I heard that day. No matter what the sound was, it did not sound right in any way. When I heard it, I probably jumped 5 feet in the air, and my brother yelled a few choice curse words before pushing me out of the tunnel quickly. At this point, my brother decided that we should just keep walking and turn around once whatever was making that noise had, hopefully, gone away. We were not carrying any guns, so I felt pretty bad. My brother told me that we would be fine, and the walk back went smoothly. But I didn't sleep that night. Whether it was the thing that screamed at us or just my imagination, I heard things moving around the campsite and whispers reverberating just outside the trailer the whole night. I tried to wake up my brother a few times to find out what was going on, but he always said that it was probably just other campers staying up late and having fun. The trip went on pretty normally after that. The next day, we left, and my life went back to normal. I just thought that what had happened was nothing to worry about and that I must have been exaggerating. A few weeks later, I went to an old ski lodge called Pine Basin. My family used to rent this place every year for family reunions. I used to mess around with my cousins. Our favorite things to do were night games, like hide and seek and a game called Ghosts in the Graveyard. Because I was one of the younger cousins, I was chosen to be the seeker in a game of hide and seek. I had a flashlight, which gave me an edge. Usually, all of the younger cousins gather near the lodge, while the older cousins hide in the nearby trees or at the base of a nearby mountain. I was looking near the bottom of the mountain when I heard a familiar whistle just a little ways up the mountain. We would always whistle to let people know where we were. It sounded like someone was hiding near a tree called Underwear Tree, and you can guess why. So I started to walk up to the whistle. As I got closer, I started to feel uneasy in my stomach. I kept going with caution and told myself I would be fine. I didn't like walking alone at night, but I thought that whoever I met would take me back to the launch. As I got closer to the tree, I could hear that it was very quiet. This made me realize that something was very wrong because I could always hear the adults having fun back at the lodge. I was in a hurry to get back, so I called out, "Scott, I found you. Join me in going back down." I didn't hear back, but I didn't plan to wait. I heard a voice call as I started walking back down the path. "You were almost right." so I ran back up to see what was going on. I shined my flashlight into the tree's branches and saw a horrible thing that wasn't my cousin. With its skinny body and empty eyes, it looked like a poorly drawn stick figure of a person. I remember that the skin on its face looked like it was being pulled from behind. It had torn and stretched parts that didn't look right. I screamed, dropped the flashlight, and ran back to the lodge as soon as I saw the creature. As I ran, I could smell something very strong, and I could hear something running after me. As I got closer to the camp, I saw a few people, mostly my cousins, waiting for me at the bottom of the mountain. They took me inside because I was crying and shaking. I told my dad what happened, but none of my cousins saw anything following me. We had to stay inside all night because the adults made us, and I kept hearing sounds coming from the mountains. After that, I never played games at night again, and I was always afraid that my cousins wouldn't listen to my warnings. Up in those mountains, I've always felt uneasy. I used to be very religious, so I thought it was a demon, or something like that trying to kill me. But after what happened, those mountains have never been the same again. A few years ago, the game Until Dawn got a lot of attention, and I watched a YouTube video that showed how to play it. When the Wendigo showed up for the first time in the game, it sent shivers down my spine. I did a lot of research on them and it was just what I saw. I thought that someone must have become snowed in at that old lodge and started eating people. But that does not explain what happened at Warm River. I still hear that screech now and then, and it never occurred to me until I was watching Until Dawn that they might be the same thing. It scared the hell out of me every time I heard it earlier tonight, so I decided to finally write down my story. I'm very shocked by this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially if you have experience. I had a very strange thing happen to me in a national forest in California last year. I was driving alone with my dog on a road trip, and I was pretty far into the Mendocino National Forest. I like to camp in national parks and forests because it's so quiet and my dog and I can go wherever we want without having to pay. A trade-off for sometimes scary, bumpy drives into parks and a lack of service and help. Anyway, around 5 p.m., I was driving up this dirt road that wound up the side of a mountain. It was a beautiful day, sunny and warm with a light breeze. Nothing bad happened, but as I drove into the area and up the mountain, I felt very uncomfortable. I felt like I shouldn't stay there, so I texted my boyfriend about it as long as I could before my phone stopped working. I looked for signs that someone else had been in the area recently, but I didn't find anything. I stopped my car and got out with my dog to look over the edge. There was a dead squirrel and some broken glass in the dirt and gravel, which was gross. My dog lets out a small growl. She talks a lot, but I've almost never heard or seen her do anything but growl at all with other dogs. I did hear her growl at a possum, so it could be that she smelled something. This place keeps making me nervous, but I'm proud of being an independent traveler and backpacker, so I decided to go at least a little bit further with my grumbling dog to see if I could find a good place to camp. I keep seeing more dead animals. Keep in mind that no one is going to be going more than 5 to 10 miles per hour up this thing, if there is anyone there at all. I hear the voices of men, and they sound close enough that I think I should call out to them. So I stopped my car, but then I felt like I shouldn't because I can't really hear what they are saying. I don't see any signs of people anywhere, so I get back in my car and drive slowly forward, while listening carefully for voices. In a national park or forest, I have never seen anyone else. When I'm this far in, the voices that have come and gone a few times start to make me feel uneasy. I give up and start to turn my car around. I honestly can't remember how my dog was acting on the way down. I was afraid, and all I could think about was getting us out of there. I just remember being surprised by how loud she was grumbling. When we were waiting outside my car, it was going pretty fast. When I went back down the mountain, I didn't see anyone. I decided to treat myself and spend the night in a hotel. I thought I was fine, since big, open spaces can be scary. I told myself that the voices could have come from a very long way away. They sounded so similar. Animals die, glass gets broken, nothing happened, cool. I remember this place, though. I think about it every time I watch a scary movie. If I'm out in the woods with my dog at night. I've never felt anything like I did when I was driving up that mountain, and it's both scary and interesting to me. I recently came across some facts and stories about Native Americans that made me feel very uncomfortable. 1 year has passed. I've told a few people about this place and how spooky it made me feel, but that's about it. I looked up the national park once on Google, but I didn't look very hard and didn't find anything. I like scary movies and things that are strange, so this little event is interesting to me. Just yesterday, my boyfriend and I were getting close to the end of our road trip. Only 2 or 3 hours were left, and the sun had already gone down. So we decided to go to YouTube and listen to some scary podcasts. We went from the No Sleep podcast, to the X-Files, to true stories about Native American legends. I'm only half paying attention because I'm petting my dog and playing Pokemon on an emulator when I hear the narrator say, "Window goes," and say what they are and that they can imitate voices. I'm not kidding when I say that the worst chills I've ever felt are crawling down my spine. I look at my boyfriend and ask him if he remembers that scary national forest. He says that he does, and he reminds me that he texted me. I may have been near a wendigo. I do remember him saying that, but I didn't know much about their legends, so I thought he was just being funny, like, "Yeah, Bigfoot is probably stalking you," or some other dad joke. He told me, "No, I mean, I was mostly kidding, but I said that because you said you were hearing voices you couldn't find." I feel weird, so I look up Window Goes There and read that there are animals that can imitate human voices and live in that area. It all made sense. There is a lot of doubtful information out there, but I tried to find more trustworthy websites and real-life experiences. I then looked for people who had gone missing in the area. And the first headline that catches my eye is that another family has gone missing in Mendocino. I looked at different websites and news articles about people going missing, but they were all mostly hidden behind national park websites and pictures of trees. About a year ago, I looked up the forest and didn't find anything. I also noticed that these stories didn't seem to be talked about much, which also got my attention. Over 100 people have gone missing and not been found in the last 8 years, and many others have been found dead. It just makes me very suspicious. Remembering how unsafe I felt and how much I wanted to get out of there scares me, and what I heard made me feel so uneasy. My dog and I are very close because of this day. She was a stray dog who started following me around one day, so I took her home with me from Costa Rica. So when I hear her little growls along the way, I think something is wrong. Even though it was only a video with a story. Those tales come from some place. I've traveled alone a lot, both in and out of the country, and I've never felt so bad. Plus, I've never seen so many dead animals in a national forest, which just seems weird. I don't think I'll travel alone much more, unless it's near a town or city. Does anyone know what real Native American stories are? Or has anyone else had something like this that is hard to explain? I'm not sure if this is the right place to talk about this, but I'm scared to death either way. From what I've heard and read online, I think what I saw was a wendigo. Something came after me, my son, and my girlfriend. We were camping in the far north of Washington state. My girlfriend is very superstitious, so she insisted that we bring weapons with us. So I brought my combat knife and a 12-gauge shotgun, and she brought a 22 caliber rifle and a machete that had just been sharpened. At the time, our son was only 3 years old. She and I were set on edge from a park ranger, who seemed very tense and uneasy, who stopped us and instead of confiscating our weapons, told us to be careful and stay safe. Then we were sent on our way to camp. When we got there, people told us that they had heard strange voices and seen a pale creature that would imitate the voices and sounds of people who weren't talking or didn't seem to be paying attention. I laughed and pushed the thought out of my mind, telling myself that they couldn't be messing with us, but I knew better. Then we got to the place where we were going to camp. We immediately got a fire ready to light and set up our tent and bags. I fed my son, and as my girlfriend ate a snack, we decided to get a lay of the area. So me and my girlfriend hiked around for about an hour or so. I had one of those baby carrying backpacks and my son started to get real heavy. Everything seemed normal until I saw something down the almost path we were on. We walked closer to investigate and saw drag marks. It looked as if someone had killed a buck. There was a whole outline in the dirt with a small dried pool of blood, as if someone grabbed it from the antlers and pulled. That wouldn't be possible for any man to do. The buck, or whatever it was, would have been way too big for that shaken. We rushed back to base camp and restarted the fire and hurried back to our tent, too afraid to leave since it was dusk by now. We stayed inside the tent and my girlfriend put our son to bed. Eventually, probably from the exhaustion of fright, we fell asleep. What must have been hours later, I awoke to a faint rasping sound that sounded like a child crying. I gazed outside in confusion and saw the outline of a creature that seemed to be a buck standing over something. It seemed to be about 20 feet away, but at a closer glance had unnaturally long limbs for a buck and was eerily tall in sudden fear. I unloaded 2 shots into the creature and heard a loud blood-curdling cry. My girlfriend awoke screaming to the shots I had fired as I tried to explain what I had heard. To my surprise, the animal hadn't moved an inch. Then I noticed the stains on the side of the animal. It looked like blood was running down the edge and lots of it. It stared at me deep into my eyes as I became petrified with fear. A sinister feeling of dread fell over me as it knew I couldn't move. I thought to myself, what if it starts to bolt toward us? Just then this tall, decrepit, demonic thing seemed to whisper something. I couldn't exactly tell what it was saying, but it seemed to have said something like, "I need more children." My girlfriend screamed, asking where our son was. We blocked out. In the morning, we awoke to park rangers at our campsite. We didn't see our son anywhere. We told the rangers that he was missing and they started a search party. I explained what had happened and strangely they seemed to believe it. The one who seemed to be the older one by at least a decade or so, pulled along the one we met earlier and whispered in his ear. I only heard a single line and I'm not sure if it was what I heard was correct. It sounded like, "You said it's getting bolder." They didn't seem to want us by ourselves. So they waited with us while they continued the search. We stayed in a log cabin for 3 days with a ranger when suddenly some rangers came into the cabin saying they couldn't find our son. My girlfriend starts to sob and I start to hate myself, thinking I could have done something if I wasn't frozen in fear. We rushed outside only to find some injured and frightened police officials. The rangers wouldn't tell us anything of what happened or what they saw or why. The cops were scared shitless. All I know is that I don't have a son anymore and I've never felt such despair and pain and emptiness in my life. I miss him. And if I can go back in time, I would take back that camping trip. My life has since never been the same. I'll always miss him.